Thank you for having me, Matt.
Of course.
Great. So if I come across clear and my screen is being shared, then I will start. Um, Hi, everyone. I'm Adi Singh. Like Matt introduced me, I'm the product manager at Canonical for robotics and automotive. Um, I have a background in robotics myself. I worked in specifically robotic navigation, and I have experience in the automotive field as well. And I've worked for and with OEMs, tier ones, and tier two suppliers. And previously, when I was actually at the West Coast, I was the principal scientist for aerial robotics at Ford Motor Company, so for their R&D division. So very happy to be here, and I thank you all for attending this talk. What I want to talk about in this time is how builders like yourself can ensure top security for your robots beyond the end of life date of their key security components. So that's why I'm talking about not just securing robots, but securing robots for the long term, the sustainable strategy. And I'll talk about that term ESM that I mentioned there. If you haven't come across that before, I'll be using it quite a lot. But before I jump there, let's talk a little bit about Canonical. I hope all of you know about Canonical. If not, we are the publishers of Ubuntu, which is probably being used, which is most definitely being used by all of you to run your ROS workloads. I've seen that in the robotics and automotive industry, there is this schism where everyone knows about Ubuntu, but I get eyebrows raised when I talk about Canonical. So we are the force behind Ubuntu, and we are very proud of it. We are very proud of our stature in the open source ecosystems as well. These are kind of the playgrounds or the battlegrounds, if you want to be vicious about it, where we have offerings. We work in public cloud. We work on the data center. Bulk of our work goes in the data center. Also, the Internet of Things, which is where robotics comes in, falls under, and also edge cluster. The IoT um, is something that we are ramping up our efforts around, and our primary business model across all these fields, it revolves around providing support for open source software. So we contribute to open source software, we build open source software, but then a large chunk of our value proposition is you're going to need someone who knows the nuts and bolts of open source to maintain it at an enterprise level, and a lot of our business model revolves around that. So those are the broad strokes, as far as the battlefield is concerned for us. Now, extending that to robotics, Canonical doesn't build robotics. We support robots, right? We support robots through the open source ecosystem. We help others build secure, reliable, and scalable robots by supporting that open source ecosystem on which all of us are very reliant. Our vision is, we want to see a world where all robots are proactively secured and maintained. Again, we don't build robots, but we love robots, and we want to see more robots out there. And more importantly, we want to see that these robots out there are actually secure and supported and easily maintained, right? So not just chunks of metal rolling down the streets with loose wires hanging out, but actually robots that have had a certain amount of disciplined engineering behind it. And part of that disciplined engineering is coming up with a long-term plan for securing and maintaining these things when you're out there, when they're actually out there deployed in the field. And this is nothing new, right? This is how the industry has worked. It's just, it's important that we emphasize the importance of that point. So our key offering, that is really what we bring to the table. Our key offerings to the industrial robotics world is that security and maintenance. Proactive security through live patching and industry standard, and ensuring that you adhere to your code adheres to industry standard benchmarks, and also maintenance for the Ubuntu and the ROS and the other principal components in your robot. So I'll take a step back here and really, I've given you the spiel, but I want to really break it down into its components. Why is whatever I'm talking about, if it's so obvious, why is this a big deal? Well, let's look at something familiar. When was the last? I mean, I wish this was an interactive session so I could have asked some of you to raise your hands, but Think about when was the last time you heard about COBOL in the news, right? Let's take a moment to think about that. The right answer is, sometime in the last couple of months, even though, it's a language that hasn't been used and hasn't been popular culture or popular use for a long time, for decades. It's only a couple of months ago that we heard about how the American unemployment system, the processing system for unemployment benefits, had a lot of COBOL built on it. And now that the claims had been had been going through the roof, um, the the government had been looking for COBOL developers, right? And it's funny to read that, but to think, if you really come down to brass tacks, uh, COBOL isn't as irrelevant as one might think, right? It's estimated that COBOL runs close to 90% of all Fortune 500 business software worldwide, and and this 90% of the code is responsible still for around 85% of business transactions each day, right? So think about that, right? All the JavaScript you come across, all the C++, or everything that you come across, right? All the business code you come across, that's just 15% of all the business transactions each day. And according to IBM, there's still around 200 billion lines of COBOL code still in use today by various industries. So 200 billion, that's, with a B. And so yeah, it's logical to wonder, well, why is the language still relevant? Why hasn't it been replaced? It's just, just you have newer languages, you have newer frameworks, you have easier, you have a way to do things easier. Why not just change? And I guess the way I would summarize it is that change is rather painful, and enterprises, bigger enterprises, conservative enterprises, generally are more reluctant to 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 make snap decisions and change things just when something new comes up, right? Just because something new comes up, because new things come up all the time, right? And perhaps some organizations, or some people would hate change, inherently, or they're not ready to move to newer versions of a software, or maybe you have systems out there, or in this case robots out there, that are still deployed, and the transition of a remote update is just too painful, right? Ultimately, the question for a business organization, for an enterprise, comes down to, is the return on investment for transitioning worth it, right? What is the ROI there? Can we just stay on COBOL for the next 60 years? And is that cheaper? Is that more efficient for us than revamping the entire system in a newer programming language, for instance, right? So how does that relate to robots, right? I've been talking about, change. I've been talking about, things coming to an, languages or frameworks living way past their support. Well, we are very well aware that Kinetic and Xenial, the Ubuntu version on which Kinetic is built, they are reaching end of life next year, right? So they have, as an LTS, both have 5 years of long-term support, and after that, it's hoped that the ecosystem switches to another version. And I put in the Python symbol there, but Python 3 is still relevant, but Python 2 came, reached its end of life as last year. So we're talking about an ecosystem on which, a foundation on which a large part of this ecosystem is built. And a robot often, being a piece of hardware, with a lot of software in, but being a piece of hardware, a robot often lasts well beyond the standard support lifecycle of the software running on it, right? Whether that is Ubuntu or whether that is the robot operating system. And this is something that was a realization that we at Canonical came across, that we have in industrial organizations spending years developing and deploying their products on a steady software foundation. And you don't want to take that foundation away. You don't want to risk changes to the code base, massive changes to the code base that could ultimately lead to breaking your build, right? And major transitions from one LTS to another, it constitutes that sort of a major risk. And organization at scale may not be willing to take that kind of a risk. And maybe they've already got robots running out in the field, and you don't want to risk remote updating them, right? So we definitely found this little area to play in, or this value that we could bring in terms of how we can help the ecosystem and fill in the gap between a robot that you have spent years developing and the gap that is provided by that appears because the foundation on which you have built it is kind of has reached end of life. This is where ESM comes from. So finally, I talk about ESM. Right? ESM stands for Extended Security Maintenance. Um, it's a mouthful. That's why we always refer to it as ESM. And ESM is the term for for filling that gap that I was referring to. Right. So ROS ESM, for instance, it eliminates this issue by providing um, security support for the key software on the robot for longer than the standard 5 years. So you can keep it running for as long as you wish. And as part of our ESM offering, we support this ROS kinetic ecosystem, beyond its end of life, and save users the trouble of transitioning from their infrastructure to a newer ROS distro. And I have some numbers supporting that, so just bear with me for a second. But to put this in context, this isn't something that Canonical is doing just for the love of ROS, right? This is something that Canonical has done for a lot of other projects. We've done this for a number of other open source projects that we care about, right? We've done this for OpenStack, for Ceph, for Kubeflow, and a host of managed apps, right? And in specifically, what ROS ESM means is that when a ROS distribution reaches its end of life, we will continue to contribute security updates and support for the distribution itself and for the codependencies, so that you don't have to worry that staying on an unsupported or officially unsupported version of ROS compromises your system in any way, right? So in this case, it means Python 2 will also be supported because it's a codependency of kinetic um, and vicariously your robot as well, right? Just taking a minute to look at some numbers that I promised. This is some data that I just pulled off of metrics, ROS metrics, usage metrics. So I really appreciate the work that the community has put behind collecting all these metrics and having this data ready, because it really helps a lot of people make strong data-driven decisions. And if you look at this graph, ignore the white line at the top, because that's just a cumulative of all the repositories in ROS across distros. So we're interested in all the colored lines there, and it gives you an overview of the number of repositories or the number of packages, more or less, per distribution of ROS, right? So the red bar there, it shows the packages for kinetic, and it is by far the highest one of all the supported distros, right? We're not looking at Indigo because that reached end of life way before, and its usage amongst the community has also dropped. But 46% of all packages have been built for kinetic, as opposed to 31% for melodic. As you can see there's the dark blue line and the red line, and there's a significant gap between them. So we still see that, we see here why kinetic is still so widely used, right? Because a lot of packages and features exist in kinetic that are not in other distros, right? And that usage is reflected in this in this graph, where it's a little bit noisy, but if you focus on, again, the red part, which shows the use of kinetic over time, you can see that even as of today, if you go to the rightmost part of the graph, even as of today, there is a significant portion of the community that uses kinetic, and my hypothesis is it's because you have so many packages that you only find on kinetic, and also there's 5 years or 4 years of development work that has gone in a robot that is built on kinetic, or a system that is built on kinetic, right? So from our perspective, it kind of made sense that we started here, right? The timing kind of synced up, and we recognize that space, that red space you see there, is kind of the group that needs ESM and can benefit from ESM. And it's not a vanishing group like what you see for Indigo, right? Which is essentially no one uses it. It's essentially kinetic and melodic at this point. and Melodic still has a few years, 3 more years to go. So we plan on bringing this to other distros in the future, but we needed a starting point, and we feel Kinetic is really the right place to begin our endeavor with. This is a similar graph. This is by Ubuntu distro users instead of ROS distro users. So this was the ROS versions, and this is the Ubuntu version, and they look kind of similar, right? Which is you can kind of see that this trend is reflected because you upgrade your Ubuntu version and then you upgrade your ROS version together with it. But there's still a lot of people who are still on Ubuntu 16.04, which is the pink portion here, right? Xenial. And that is around the same amount of people, same fraction of people who are still using Kinetic, right? So there is this, we keep on seeing these data points that show that, there is organizational reluctance to upgrade after you spent a lot of time, working on a system, and there is an appetite for having these things supported beyond the standard 5 years, 5 years of official long-term support. Right, so that's really where we, the value proposition that we bring to the community. And right now we are undergoing beta testing for our ROS Kinetic ESM. And this is my final slide, which is why it's pretty sparse. After showing you a bunch of data, I figured I'll go a little easy on you towards the end. So if whatever I talked about ROS ESM, it sounds something interesting, something valuable to you, do reach out to me. As I said, we are running beta tests, and we'd really appreciate your help in advancing this ecosystem by helping us with these beta tests, and in exchange for helping us work out the kinks and make sure this is as useful as possible, as seamless a UX as possible to you and the larger community. We'd be pleased to offer you, a free year of ESM for your ROS once it becomes, generally available. So once again, if my email does not make it clear enough, my name is Singh, and I look forward to hearing from you, whether it is about ESM or about other aspects of ROS. And that's all, Matt.
Well, thanks, Adi. I appreciate it. I guess real quick, is there any other kind of places to have a dialogue? I mean, other than just emailing you directly, do you have, is there a thread like you or Kyle have going over on Discourse or anything?
Right. There isn't a dedicated thread, but Discourse is a democratic platform. If somebody pings in it, I get reports from Discourse. I check Discourse, on an almost daily basis. So if I mention there, or if any of other, my other Canonical team members, like Kyle is very active, and Sid Faber is very active, and Joe McManus he's a leader of this group, right? So if anyone is mentioned, it ultimately gets surfaced to me. This is just a very direct way. If someone just wants to, instead of putting up a public post, they just want to, get in touch with me. But of course, you can always, put stuff up on Discourse, and I'll be happy to engage in discussions there as well.
So I guess to clarify, I mean, are you looking for, so hypothetically, right? I mean, let's just say I'm aware of a production deployed ROS Kinetic system. The end user is very happy with it, right? Because it's running production. That would be an ideal candidate for ESM, correct?
Absolutely, exactly. Because you don't know if changing things will, once your customer is happy, it's a pretty volatile state, right? You don't want to touch it too much.
No, and it's a very practical thing we run into. I mean, as we've thought about pivoting ROS Industrial more towards ROS2, we've had to, and for those of you who have a lot of experience on the industry side, who worked with, like, say, for instance, Fanuc or Rockwell or even Siemens, the beauty of a lot of those sort of traditional industrial OEMs is they have legacy support for a very long time. I mean, right? So I was trying to, upgrade like robotic functions and capabilities on the factory floor and had to interoperate with this PLC they did not want to change because it worked, right? And it was 10 years, and Rockwell, to their credit, still supported it. And so similarly, we get challenged, right? You guys call yourself industrial, hey, this is working. Why would I tear it down? Quote unquote, tear it down to version, say, ROS. And to your point, right, we, in a number of our different settings, we have run into a lot of people still working in Kinetic as well, right? So no, this is very interesting. I'll have to work between you, Addie, and Kyle, and see if there's some other opportunities, either with active development that's still going on in Kinetic, which I still see, and a number of us I'm sure still see, and then potentially within our consortium membership that are still deploying and supporting Kinetic deployments, and see if there's an opportunity there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the value proposition here.
No, it's very insightful. And it's a need, and it's a gap that we don't necessarily have immediate needs for. You know, we get more and more proposals now with a whole list of security requirements we're supposed to adhere to. So it's good to know there's some resources available.
Great, wonderful.